This is The Wind, a podcast made at a desk in the mountains. Spring comes late here. When the snow shell finally melts, the creek swells, and I often change my route entirely, crossing further downstream and walking up the other side. That is also the side that gets more sun, so I'm able to shed my snowshoes and step through the bare-printed mud. The weather doesn't just change my route, but the entire sound of the valley. The birds reappear, the creek becomes loud as the snowmelt rushes downhill. When the trees begin to bud, their relative silence is broken by new surfaces for the wind to rustle, and I lay in the yellow grass as the new green blades arrive from below. The weather creates a new space entirely, not decorated by sound, but partially built by it. Each temporary resident, as we all are, listens and sounds and perceives, as if tied together by invisible strings. This interview was recorded in a place where spring comes much earlier than here, and lasts a long time. This episode is called Edward Torres at the Bob Baker Marionette Theater.
The Wind. With Phil Corbett.
It's a foggy spring evening. Dusk settles as a muted bluish gray and is pierced by the yellow-orange flash of western tanagers visiting the neighborhood fruit trees. Approaching the main drag, mockingbirds offer their borrowed tunes. Some are taught by machine. The song of the car alarm in a city built for the automobile. Up the freeway a few miles from downtown Los Angeles is the neighborhood Highland Park, a low-slung part of town with bungalows and side streets, and I turn the corner onto York Boulevard. Headlights throw shadows onto the sidewalk and onto me, and as the streetlights flicker on, I approach the warm glow of a historic theater. What was once a silent movie house long ago now buzzes with the sound of children, their parents, and a handful of chatty 20-somethings who are neither. This is the Bob Baker Marionette Theater, and through the swinging doors from the lobby, a bright red carpet unfurls down a gentle slope, all the way to the bright red stage curtain. To the left of the stage, still a few minutes from showtime, another red curtain has been pulled to the ceiling, and in a raised alcove, the back of an ornate jacket faces the audience. The person wearing this jacket is almost entirely enveloped by a cockpit of levers, foot pedals, buttons, and 4 rows of piano keys. His fingers glide across all of these options with amazing fluidity. This is Edward Torres, the organist at the Puppet Theater, and he weaves through a medley of arrangements like a driver dipping seamlessly from lane to lane. Each song a passing exit or town, and then the organ swells, and the lights dim, and the curtain drops, and the puppet show begins.
Good heavens. Well, hi, everyone. This is Edward Torres, the house organist here at the Bob Baker Marionette Theater, located in Los Angeles, California, in sunny Southern California. Well, here we are at the organ, as you can see. It's quite a menagerie of a whole lot of different buttons and switches and keys and just a whole lot of things that can scare people half to death if they don't know what you're doing with it. A little tour of the instruments. So, this is what you call a theater organ, theater pipe organ. These were designed back in the 19-teens and 20s to play for silent movies, of all things. And it was basically designed to be a one-man band. So, if you look around the horseshoe of the organ, you'll see all these different tongue-shaped Tabs. Yeah, that would be. Yeah, thank you. I remember brain fart. I'm too young for a senior moment, but there you go. And they have a lot of different things labeled on them. So you have things that are supposed to mimic the sound of an orchestra. So you have something that's supposed to sound like a brass trumpet. That's going to be on that side of the building.
Okay.
We have another smaller trumpet, which is located on this side. You have things that are supposed to sound like tubas. You have things that are supposed to sound like a orchestral clarinet. And you have things that are supposed to sound like saxophones. Now, you have to keep in mind, when these instruments were built, just about 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago, they were doing the best with what they could, given pipe organ building technology of the 19-teens and 20s. This is supposed to sound like a saxophone. Does it sound like a real saxophone? No, unless you've had one too many to drink. But that's what they had back then. And there are all sorts of these funny little sounds that you've never heard of before, and there are these fuzzy
How do you describe Bob Baker to somebody like the Marionette Theater, to somebody who's never been here before? You know, if somebody was like, wait, where do you play? Like, how would you describe this place?
Well, I tell them it's something that you don't really see a lot of anymore. And I describe the Marionette Theater as basically a marionette theater, a puppet theater, where we do like hour-long shows on average. And it's a little trip down memory lane for some people, and it's certainly a piece of history that we're preserving here and presenting here. And I tell people you should at least give it one go, just give it a shot, give it a try, and you'll find that you'll fall in love with it. And a lot of people that I brought here never thought they would. And now they're like, I can't believe, this is the first time I'm hearing about this. And just like you hear at the beginning of every show, we've been here for 60 years. Where have you been? I mean, my goodness. So they keep coming back, and it's a really beautiful thing, actually.
Something that's really interesting to me about both, the puppet theater and the organ is that these are like pretty traditional, old school forms of expression, Is there something in those forms of expression that is like missing in current forms of expression? Are they relevant for a reason?
Well, that's an interesting question, but I am glad that you brought it up, that I have often faced it within the theater organ community. And something I was just talking to the other puppeteers about is both of the art forms are unfortunately becoming dying art forms. I mean, there are more people picking it up now, which is fantastic, but not nearly at the same capacity as they both were back in their heyday. And I would say it's absolutely still relevant now. an important piece of Americana, well, at least theater organs. I think puppetry goes back even farther than the 19 teens and 20s. But it's a piece of history that we're preserving here and presenting here. And it's absolutely something that needs to be carried on into the future because if we don't, then unfortunately, it's one of those situations where it'll slowly but surely die out. And that'd be a great shame to see happen to either one of the art forms, frankly. So we are absolutely preserving history here, and people are falling in love with it, and it's great. It's fantastic.
I mean, it does feel like it's preserving history, but it feels like it's also doing something else as well. Like, it doesn't just feel like a recreation. Like, it feels very alive, you know?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's a feeling that is very, very hard, I think, to replicate out, digitally or even, over the computer. It's not something that kids can like look at a TV and go, oh, wow, or, a computer screen and enjoy it. This is something that is much more tangible, it seems. It brings a lot of the human factor back into play, into especially kids' lives, I think, nowadays with how technology has progressed, which is wonderful. But this is sort of getting back to the roots, I want to say. I think that would be the best way to describe it. Getting back to basic human interaction and the overall feeling of being a part of something, truly. It's beautiful, I think. But anyways, I just play the organ. I don't know.
Even the organ itself, right? It's like every organ is different and it interacts with every room in a different way. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of does create this sonic landscape that can't exist elsewhere, that can't exist on your iPad.
Exactly. They are living, breathing machines, and it's a shame that so many of them have not survived. Back in the heyday of the 1920s, there was probably well over, maybe 5,000 or 6,000 of these instruments scattered all across the United States. I know there were several hundred here in LA alone, and now I think we only have like 12 left in LA, and only about 200 left internationally that are still surviving in one way or another is a great shame.
Bob Baker Marionette Theater does puppet shows in cabaret style, which means the puppeteers are fully visible during the performance. For most of the shows, they wear a striking all-red outfit which blends into the theater's backdrop, but you can see them the whole time on the strings. The stage is lower than the seats, on a gentle slope, and the puppeteers don't act or provide vocal accompaniment. Instead, a pre-recorded track of layered audio plays through the house speakers, featuring voice actors, sound effects, and vintage show tunes, to which the puppets sing along and perform intricate choreographies. It's hard to describe the form, but the effect is an arresting cascade of expressive, blinking works of handcrafted art. The audio tracks are a work of art too. Many assembled by Bob Baker himself, splicing together physical tape from a deep archive reaching well into Broadway and Hollywood history. This is a clip from the show Hooray LA, featuring 2 mountain lion puppets tap dancing and duetting to a Doris Day recording in the Hollywood Hills. A glowing full moon hangs behind them.
Your silvery beams will bring our city started with this little adobe house, still standing on Olvera Street in downtown Los Angeles.
As you watch from the sidelines, as the organist, what have you noticed in puppetry that is similar to playing a keyboard or playing the organ?
Well, I would say that, choreography in a way, and that's sort of a weird way to describe what I do, but everything that I do on the organ is a delicate dance. That's one way to think about it. Even a hot and fast number from the 1920s, it's still sort of a delicate dance of getting everything just right. And that's what I see the puppeteers do all the time. Not to mention, you can absolutely see the passion in the puppeteers just by their movements, their body language and their movements when they're puppeteering. For someone like me who has seen a puppet show 1.5 million times now, you learn to stop necessarily paying attention to the marionette, and your eyes sort of look up and you can see the puppeteers. And each puppeteer is slightly different. And what I absolutely love is seeing that although all the puppeteers can manipulate similar marionettes or the same marionettes, they all do it slightly differently. And it is something that I recognize in my own playing in the theater organ world, in that each one of them is sort of creating their personal signature of how to manipulate puppets. And it is, like I said, it's something that I see myself within the theater organ community, because you can have two musicians playing the exact same song, whatever it may be, and they'll both play it slightly differently. And it's the exact same thing with puppets. So in that respect, there are lots and lots of things that I see that are absolutely similar and that I resonate with.
Yeah, I was doing research into the history of organs, and the word organ comes from, I believe, Latin organon, and basically what it meant early on was that it was just a tool, like it was that with which one does. So it's kind of like a stand-in. I mean, even like your vital organs are kind of the same thing. Like, it's just like, oh yeah, your heart is an organ. It does this job. It does this thing. That's sort of like what you said with like the puppets and the organ, it being this sort of like conduit for something that's like deeply personal.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Without a doubt. I think for both of the art forms, at an early age, I discovered that I can really put a lot of my, I could play my emotions through my fingers. I could play something. If I was sad, I was feeling it, I could play it through that. If I was angry, I would play the piano a different way. And it's something that I translate to now. Music for me, performing on this particular instrument for me, is an extremely personal zen, if you will. And that's, it's interesting that you point that out, because I will tell you that it is, like I said, it was a delicate dance, but also I'm putting so much of myself and my feeling into my playing. And when it resonates with folks, perhaps visiting for the first time or the 100th time, it means so much to me that I'm able to make a difference and make that connection with the folks from all walks of life, really. And it's the same with the puppets. It's the same with the puppetry here, with the puppeteers, to the point where you can really see a lot of the puppeteers' personalities come through. And to be able to, for me to be able to sit on the sidelines and see that is such an honor. It's such a thrill for me, because I obviously I get to meet the puppeteers and get to know them and see how that translates through their art form. And it's just a thrill. It is. An instrument of this size you have to be careful of, because if you have it at full tilt at 100% for the full half hour that I play the house in, you're going to have people running out in the streets. There's going to be riots. My gosh. But you just kind of want to perfume the air with music and really set a warm and inviting tone of, hey, this is something exciting, something interesting is going to happen, and I hope you enjoy the show. Yeah.
Bob Baker Marionette Theater was founded in 1963. Bob Baker had been creating puppets since childhood, and he founded a physical theater on the edge of downtown Los Angeles, which ran shows and enchanted children for 50 years in that location. After Baker's passing in 2014, the theater fell on tenuous times, and they were pushed out of the building that the organization and its collection of thousands of puppets had called home for decades. The building was slated for redevelopment, but still sits vacant. They were able to find this building, what was once the York Theater, a silent movie house in Highland Park, and had been a whole string of things, including a church, in the meantime. It transformed into a dreamy, whimsical space, complete with a theater organ. The move to this new space was in 2019, and just 4 months after it opened, the pandemic hit, again threatening the theater's survival. But they pulled through and returned post-pandemic with a show called Reopening Revelry. Is there any specific show that comes to mind as like a very special time behind the organ?
I would say the one that's probably the most touching for me was probably Reopening Revelry. That was the first show that we did after the reopening of everything, because it was for the first time in a long time that I had performed in front of an audience, as well as the puppeteers performing in front of an audience. And it was one of those situations where we were all sort of in the same boat together. One of the most interesting and touching moments that I ever had in that first show, in that first year that we really reopened things, was I would have young families come up to me after the show was over, and I was just sort of playing the house out, or I just finished up, and I remember the parents of the kids coming up and said, you're the first live music that our kids has ever experienced, and we just wanted you to know that. And that was so touching for me, to be that first step for a lot of these young families. It's so hard to describe. It was so touching. It truly was.
This as live music, it seems like very emblematic of what live music can do that other forms can't, in that it ties you to a specific room. And that seems to be something a theater organ really does in ways that other instruments don't always do.
Well, both literally and figuratively. Can you imagine trying to move that thing? I mean, that don't exactly fit in the back of a sedan these days. I mean, my God. So it certainly ties you to a room that way.
Ed had prepared a few recordings, which he could play through the same speakers that the organ was wired to. We slowly ambled around the theater, listening for the way that the instrument interacted with the architecture. Ed said his favorite place to hear it was out in the lobby. So we wandered out there and stood by the front desk.
In terms of sound, being sort of far away helps it to develop a little bit more. So
it kind of turns the whole theater into like the resonant body, like it's like a guitar.
Exactly. This the theater organs were built into buildings, so it literally becomes the voice of the building. And it's just a neat thing for me as a performer to sort of stand back and hear it.
And what do you hear of this building? Like what does it, feel like in here?
Well, I suppose it sort of feels like the soul of the building in a way. I mean, this is also a 1920s built movie theater, and a lot of the tunes that I play here were probably played here originally when they were brand new. And so it's, in a way, for me, it's interesting to hear it because it's like hearing just a little glimpse of the old gal's history and past coming back to life, even if it's just for a moment.
There's a book of essays called Figures in Air by Micah Silver about audio and audio theory. Silver writes, "Audio is not a technology, but a process that employs technology to construct temporary social architecture made of air." We build the context, and then we fill it with sound together. Each sonic offering touches every surface, and we can hear the way it moves, and how it moves through our bodies and the bodies of the people around us. A temporary social architecture made of air. What is it about this thing that, is 100 years old now in form? Like, how does that exist in this new world and continue to create important, exciting new things?
Well, I think in terms of theater organs, I think that they will survive and thrive in the new world setting, not just as being a solo instrument, but as being a part of something else. I think that's their best bet to survive in this world, because the context that they were originally that they originally came from, is no longer part of our everyday being. I mean, not many people go out to watch silent films these days. So I do think that this theater organs, like the one we're sitting in front of here, is a classic example of good old-fashioned show business and theater at its very finest. And that, it reminds me of another comment that somebody had one show, actually maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, as a matter of fact, where as I was playing the house out, this lady came up to me and she says, I just absolutely love what you do here. And she was giving me compliments, and I thanked her graciously. And she said, yes, you add just a touch of elegance to the place. I never really thought about it in those terms, but I thought, well, that's one of the nicest compliments I've ever had here. And so I guess I've been trying to add a touch of elegance ever since.
Night has long fallen when I step out onto the street. The birds are quiet, the air is warm, and for a moment the whole city rings with the voice of the theater, lingering in my ears. And then I get in my truck and drive away. The Wind is produced by me, Phil Corbett. This independent podcast is made possible by listener support. If you'd like to join the community, head to patreon.com/thewind and set up a monthly donation. You'll get access to some perks and bonus content. That's patreon.com/thewind. Thank you to Edward Torres and Eleanor Quall. For updates and occasional videos of the woods, you can, for now, find The Wind on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and always at thewind.org. Thank you for being here, and keep listening.